Station Odyssey was supposed to be the best. A prestigious multi-species academy orbiting a neutral world where the galaxy's future diplomats, traders, and leaders came to learn. The promotional materials showed smiling students from dozens of species working together, eating together, building a brighter future for the galaxy together. At least, that's what the brochures said. Nobody mentioned the hierarchy. Nobody warned you that some species mattered more than others. That your assigned dormitory, your class schedule, even which cafeteria you were allowed to use all depended on where your species ranked in the galactic pecking order. And nobody mentioned what happened when you tried to eat in the wrong place. Tala moved through the main cafeteria with her head down, trying to be invisible. It never worked. Her violet skin caught the harsh overhead lights, and the luminescent patterns on her arms, marks of her family lineage, glowed faintly even when she tried to dim them. They marked her as Myrathai, a species everyone knew had lost. Lost the territorial dispute with the Corvan Dominion. Lost their resource-rich worlds. Lost their seat on the Galactic Trade Council. Lost their dignity. The cafeteria was massive, stretching across an entire deck of the station. Dozens of food vendors lined the walls, offering cuisine from 100 different worlds. The air smelled like a confusing mixture of spices, proteins, and things Tala couldn't identify. Students filled the tables, laughing and talking in a dozen languages, their universal translators creating a constant low hum of background noise. Tala's stomach growled. She'd skipped breakfast because the Myrathai dining hall had run out of food again. Budget cuts, the administrator had explained with a shrug that said he didn't really care. The Myrathai hall was always running out of something: food, supplies, basic maintenance. Nobody complained because nobody listened to Myrathai complaints. So Tala had come to the main cafeteria. It was risky. She knew that. But she had 3 more classes today, and she couldn't focus when she was this hungry. She approached the first food station, holding out her student credit chip. The vendor, a bulky Corvan with scales like armor plating and eyes that looked right through her, glanced at her luminescent markings and shook his head. Out of stock. Tala looked at the full containers behind him. Steaming vegetables, fresh protein, bread that actually looked edible. But I can see. Out of stock. He spoke slowly, like she was stupid. Like she hadn't understood the first time. His tone made it clear this conversation was over. Tala's face burned with humiliation. A few students at nearby tables had noticed, were watching with mild interest. Entertainment for their lunch break. She moved to the next station. A different vendor, a different species. Same result. Sorry, closed for restocking. The sign above the station clearly said open. Students from other species were being served right behind her. But when Tala approached, suddenly there was a problem. She tried a third station. This vendor at least looked uncomfortable as he lied. Systems down. Can't process credits right now. Tala had been testing her credit chip all morning. It worked fine. But she just nodded and moved on, because what else could she do? Report them? Station administration didn't care about Myrathai complaints. File a formal grievance? Those disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. She was running out of vendors. Running out of options. Her hands were shaking now, partly from hunger, partly from the humiliation of being rejected over and over in front of hundreds of watching students. That's when she heard the laughter. Loud, deliberate, meant to be heard. Tala looked up and saw him, Drask, the Corvan student everyone knew. Tall, powerfully built, with scales that gleamed like polished metal. His family controlled mining operations across 3 sectors. His father was some kind of senator in the Dominion government. He was everything Tala wasn't: powerful, respected, from a species that mattered. He sat at a premium table near the center of the cafeteria, surrounded by friends. Other Corvans mostly, with a few hangers-on from mid-tier species hoping to climb socially by association. They all wore expensive clothes, the kind that cost more than Tala's entire semester fees. Look, Drask said loudly, making sure his voice carried. A bottom feeder in the main cafeteria. Did someone forget to tell it where it belongs? His friends laughed. The sound was sharp, cruel, designed to cut. Tala tried to leave. Just turn around and walk away with whatever dignity she had left. She could go back to her dorm room. Maybe her roommate would share some of her ration bars. Maybe she could make it through the day. But Drask was faster. He stood and moved to block her path, his friends forming a circle around her. Trapping her in the center of the cafeteria with hundreds of witnesses who would do nothing. Where are you going? Drask asked, his voice mockingly polite. Aren't you hungry? You came all this way to eat. Tala kept her eyes down. Don't engage. Don't give him a reason to escalate. Just survive this. I asked you a question, bottom feeder. Drask's tone hardened. When Tala didn't respond, he grabbed a plate from a nearby table, someone's half-eaten lunch, a mess of rice and protein and sauce. The student who'd been eating it started to protest, then saw Drask's face and went quiet. Drask held the plate over Tala's head for a moment, letting the tension build. Then he dumped it. The food hit the floor at her feet with a wet splat. Rice scattered across the deck plating. Sauce spread in a puddle. The protein rolled a few inches before stopping. There, Drask said, his voice filled with satisfaction. Problem solved. You wanted food? There's food. He leaned down, bringing his face close to hers. Tala could smell something sharp on his breath, see the tiny scarring on his scales from some childhood fight. If you're hungry, he said slowly, eat. From the floor. Like the bottom feeder you are. Tala stared at the scattered food. Her stomach cramped with hunger. Her eyes burned with unshed tears. Around her, the cafeteria had gone quiet. Everyone was watching now. Waiting to see what she'd do. Nobody moved. Nobody said anything. This was normal. This was just the way things were. The hierarchy maintained itself through moments exactly like this. Public humiliation, casual cruelty, the unspoken understanding that some lives mattered less than others. Tala knew what was expected. She'd apologize for disturbing them. She'd leave quietly. She'd accept that this was her place in the galaxy's order. But before she could move, a voice cut through the silence. Hey. That looks pretty good, actually. Everyone turned. A human student was walking toward them, weaving through the tables with the confidence of someone who didn't understand what he was walking into. He was average height for a human, wearing a worn engineering department shirt, with hair that looked like he'd forgotten to comb it that morning. He stopped at the edge of their circle, looking down at the spilled food on the floor. Cafeteria food's the same everywhere in the galaxy, right? He continued casually. Edible but nothing special. Then, before anyone could process what was happening, he knelt down and picked up a piece of the scattered food. He wiped it off on his shirt. And he took a bite. The cafeteria exploded with shocked whispers. This wasn't how things worked. This wasn't how the hierarchy was supposed to function. But the human just kept chewing, his eyes locked on Drask's face, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. And in that moment, everything changed. Brett pushed through the circle of Corvin students like he owned the place. Confidence was half the battle with bullies. If you acted like you belonged, sometimes they believed it. He'd learned that back in middle school dealing with kids twice his size. Different planet, different species, same basic principle. Hey, he said casually, looking down at the spilled food on the deck plating. That looks pretty good, actually. Drask turned, confused. His expression was priceless, like he couldn't quite process what was happening. What? Brett knelt down, picked up a piece of the scattered protein, wiped it off on his already stained engineering shirt, and took a bite. He chewed slowly, making a show of considering the taste. Yeah, not bad. Cafeteria food's the same everywhere in the galaxy, huh? Edible but not great. Could use more seasoning. The entire cafeteria went silent. Not gradually. It was like someone had hit a mute button on the whole room. Students at nearby tables stopped mid-conversation, forks frozen halfway to their mouths. The vendor stopped serving. Even the background hum of the universal translators seemed quieter. Brett picked up another piece, examined it, and took another bite. Drask's face cycled through several emotions in rapid succession, confusion giving way to disbelief, then disbelief hardening into anger. His scales seemed to darken, a Corvin threat display that Brett had read about but never seen in person. It was more intimidating than he'd expected. What are you doing, human? Drask's voice was low, dangerous. Eating lunch. Brett stood up, brushing crumbs off his hands. You said if she's hungry, she should eat from the floor. Well, I'm hungry too. Missed breakfast because my roommate's alarm didn't go off. So here I am. Solidarity and all that. He maintained eye contact with Drask, refusing to look away despite every survival instinct screaming at him to run. One of Drask's friends, another Corvin whose name Brett didn't know, laughed uncertainly. Is he serious right now? I think he's mocking us, another said. I'm not mocking anyone, Brett said clearly, making sure his voice carried. Just making a point. He turned to Tala, who was still frozen in shock, her luminescent markings pulsing rapidly with what Brett assumed was stress or fear. He offered his hand. You okay? She stared at his hand like it was something alien. Which, technically, it was. After a moment, she took it, and Brett helped her to her feet. See, where I come from, Brett said, turning back to address Drask and his friends, we've got this thing about bullies. We really don't like them. Doesn't matter what planet we're on or what species they are. A bully's a bully, and the response is pretty universal. You're new here, human, Drask said, stepping closer. He used his height advantage, looming over Brett. Corvins were bigger than humans, broader in the shoulders, denser bone structure, muscle mass that looked like it had been carved from stone. You don't understand the natural order. How things work on this station. Brett had to tilt his head back to maintain eye contact. His neck was already starting to hurt. Oh, I understand it fine. I've been here 2 weeks. Long enough to see how you treat people you think are beneath you. They are beneath us. The Myrathai lost. They're weak. That's simply reality. Reality's subjective, Brett said. And I don't respect your version of it. The crowd was getting larger now. Students were standing up from their tables, moving closer to see what was happening. Brett could feel dozens of eyes on him. This was either the bravest or stupidest thing he'd ever done. Possibly both. Here's what's going to happen, Brett continued, his voice steady even though his heart was racing. You're going to apologize to Tala. Then you're going to leave her alone. Forever. Not just today. Not just this week. Forever. Drask actually laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. Or what, human? You'll fight me? You'll report me to station security? He spread his arms. Look around. Hundreds of witnesses. Not one of them will say I did anything wrong. That's how power works. Or, Brett said calmly, I make your life very, very difficult. How? Drask leaned in, his breath hot on Brett's face. How could a mid-tier human possibly make my life difficult? Brett smiled. It wasn't a friendly expression. See, humans have this reputation in the galaxy. We're persistent. Some might say annoyingly so. We don't let things go. We hold grudges. We get creative with revenge. He let that sink in for a moment before continuing. I'm an engineering student. Do you know what that means? I spend my days learning about every system on this station. Environmental controls. Waste management. Water recycling. Communications networks. Power distribution. He ticked them off on his fingers. And I'm really, really good at finding loopholes in technical documentation. It was mostly a bluff. Brett had access to basic engineering labs and some maintenance databases, nothing more. But Drask didn't know that. And the uncertainty in the Corvin's eyes told Brett the bluff was working. You threaten me? Drask's voice dropped even lower. Several of his friends shifted, ready to jump in if things turned physical. I'm offering you a choice, Brett said. Be decent, or find out exactly how annoying a motivated human engineer can be. Your quarters always a comfortable temperature? Your food always taste right? Your personal data pad always work perfectly? He shrugged. Would be a shame if little glitches started happening. Nothing major. Nothing traceable. Just inconvenient. They stood there in the center of the cafeteria, locked in a staring contest while hundreds of students watched. Brett's legs were shaking. He hoped it wasn't visible. His mouth was dry. His palms were sweating. But he didn't look away. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Drask stepped back. Not far. Just enough to break the immediate tension. This isn't over, human, Drask said quietly, his voice pitched so only Brett could hear. You just made an enemy of the most powerful family on this station. That was a mistake. Looking forward to it, Brett replied, matching his tone. Drask turned to his friends. Let's go. This bottom feeder and her pet human aren't worth our time. They left, the circle breaking apart. The crowd slowly began to disperse, students returning to their tables with plenty to gossip about. Brett turned to Tala, who was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Shock, definitely. But something else too. You okay? He asked again. Why did you do that? Her voice was barely audible. No one stands up for Myrathai. No one ever has. Brett shrugged, suddenly feeling awkward now that the adrenaline was wearing off. First time for everything, I guess. Also, seriously, I really hate bullies. Always have. You just made an enemy of Drask. His family, they have influence everywhere. They can make your life impossible. Yeah, I'm getting that impression. Brett glanced over to where his roommate Nick was sitting, head in his hands, looking like he wanted to disappear. Pretty sure my roommate's going to kill me too. You don't understand what you've done. Maybe not, Brett admitted. But I understand that nobody should have to eat off the floor to survive. And I understand that sometimes someone needs to be the first person to stand up and say this is wrong. Might as well be me. I'm Tala, she said quietly. Brett. Brett Walker. Human. But you probably figured that out. Despite everything, she almost smiled. Obviously. Come on, Brett said. Let's actually get you some food. Real food, from a vendor. I bet at least one of them will serve a human without making up excuses. You can share mine. As they walked toward the food stations together, Brett noticed something. Other students were watching them differently now. Not with mockery or pity. With something that looked almost like respect. Or maybe calculation. Trying to figure out which side of this conflict to be on. Either way, tomorrow was going to be very interesting. Brett learned quickly that standing up to Drask had consequences. Real, immediate, painful consequences. Within 2 days, his locker was broken into. He discovered it when he went to grab his textbooks between classes. The door hung open, lock mechanism smashed. Nothing valuable was stolen. Brett didn't own anything valuable, but his belongings were scattered and destroyed. His spare clothes were torn. His notebooks were shredded. Someone had dumped what looked like food waste all over everything. He reported it to station security. The officer, a bored-looking alien from a species Brett didn't recognize, barely glanced at the damage. Any witnesses? The officer asked, already filling out the report in a way that suggested it would go nowhere. The whole corridor has cameras, Brett pointed out. Cameras in this section have been malfunctioning. No footage available. The officer's tone made it clear this conversation was over. No witnesses, no evidence. Nothing we can do. Right? Brett said. Of course. That was just the beginning. His engineering assignments mysteriously failed to upload to the professor's system. Brett would submit them on time, get a confirmation message, then find out the next day that the professor had no record of receiving anything. He had to redo them, losing precious sleep to meet the deadlines a second time. System glitch, the department administrator said with a shrug that told Brett she knew exactly what was happening and wasn't going to do anything about it. When he tried to access the lab equipment for a critical project, a propulsion system analysis that was worth 30% of his grade, the doors wouldn't open for his student ID. System error, the lab tech said, not meeting Brett's eyes. He was young, probably a graduate student, and he looked uncomfortable. Nothing I can do about it. You'll have to file a request with IT. How long will that take? Could be days. Maybe weeks. The lab tech lowered his voice. Look, man, just apologize to whoever you pissed off. It's not worth it. Brett's meal card stopped working for 3 days. He'd scan it at the cafeteria, and it would beep red. Insufficient funds, the screen would say, even though he knew his account had plenty of credits. Nick had to share his food, splitting portions that were already small. They're going to make your life hell until you apologize, Nick warned on the third night as they split a single meal between them. Drask has connections everywhere. His family practically owns half the station's supply contracts. He can make problems for you that you can't even imagine. I'm starting to imagine them pretty well, Brett said, his stomach still growling despite having just eaten. So apologize. Tell him you were out of line. Grovel a little. Things go back to normal. Normal sucked. Normal meant people eating off floors. Brett. I'm not apologizing. Brett's voice was firm. If I back down now, it tells everyone that standing up to bullies doesn't work. That the hierarchy is too strong to fight. I'm not sending that message. Nick sighed, the kind of long-suffering sigh of someone who knew he was dealing with a lost cause. Then I guess you better get creative. Yeah, Brett said, a plan already forming in his mind. I guess I better. But something else was happening too. Something Drask hadn't anticipated. Other students started noticing. It began small. A Talvia student named Kess sat down at Brett's lunch table uninvited. The Talvia were smaller than humans, with feathered crests that changed color with their emotions. Kess's crest was currently cycling through orange and blue, curiosity mixed with determination. What you did was stupid, Kess said bluntly, no preamble. Challenging Drask like that. You realize he could get you expelled? I'm aware, Brett said. But it was also brave. Maybe the kind of stupid we need more of. Kess's crest shifted to solid blue. The Corvins have been pushing everyone around for years. Not just Myrathai. My people too. The Harvin. The Quellin. Anyone they consider beneath them. So why doesn't anyone push back? Because fighting back means becoming a target. Kess gestured at Brett's bruised knuckles. He'd scraped them trying to salvage his destroyed locker contents. Like you did. Most people aren't willing to take that risk. Maybe they would be if they weren't alone, Brett said thoughtfully. Over the next few days, more students joined them at lunch. Not just humans, though several of Nick's friends started sitting with Brett out of solidarity. But members of other species too. Mid-tier and lower-tier species who'd been quietly accepting the hierarchy because challenging it seemed impossible. A Harvin engineer named Paz. A Quellin artist named Ven. Even a few humans from other dorms who'd heard what happened and wanted to show support. And Tala, always Tala, who seemed amazed that anyone would voluntarily associate with her after what had happened. People keep staring at us, she said nervously one afternoon. Let them stare, Brett replied. We're not doing anything wrong. Just eating lunch together. But Brett wasn't just eating lunch and accepting his punishment. He was planning. He started a careful, deliberate campaign. Nothing violent. Nothing that technically broke station rules. But very, very annoying. Every time a vendor refused service to a Myrathai student, Brett filed a formal complaint. He'd looked up the station charter, all 847 pages of it, and found the exact regulations about equal access to services. He quoted them word for word in his complaints, citing specific sections and subsections. The administration tried to ignore the first few complaints. By complaint number 15, submitted by 15 different students who Brett had taught the process, they had to respond. He organized students to sit with Myrathai and other lower-tier species at meals. Nothing organized enough to call a protest. Just friends sitting with friends. But it made it harder for bullies to isolate their targets. And he used his engineering skills creatively. Drask's quarters started having problems. The temperature was always slightly off, too cold in the day, too warm at night. Nothing extreme enough to file a complaint about, but uncomfortable enough to be annoying. The Corvin common area's lights developed a flicker. Subtle, but persistent. The kind of thing that gave you a headache after an hour. The cafeteria speakers near Corvin tables produced a faint, high-pitched hum. Most species couldn't hear it, but Corvins had excellent hearing. It drove them crazy. You're going to get caught, Nick warned, watching Brett make subtle adjustments to an environmental control panel he'd accessed through a maintenance tunnel. Maybe. But everything I'm doing is within my access level. I'm just doing routine system checks. Brett grinned. Can I help it if the systems are malfunctioning? The Corvins retaliated. They tried to frame Brett for cheating, planting evidence that he'd hacked the testing database. Brett proved it was fabricated by pulling up his location data. He'd been in the library with 12 witnesses when the alleged hack occurred. They vandalized his dorm room. Brett installed a hidden camera and caught them on video. Station security suddenly became very interested when video evidence existed. They spread rumors about him. Brett ignored them. Every move they made, he countered. Every attempt at intimidation, he turned around. And slowly, grudgingly, other students started to realize something. Brett wasn't backing down. The hierarchy could be challenged. The powerful weren't as untouchable as they seemed. That's when Drask decided to end it permanently. Brett found the notification on his datapad one morning, marked urgent, notice of Corvin combat trial. A legal, sanctioned fight used to settle disputes. The challenge was formal, public, and completely within station regulations. Nick saw the notification and went pale. Tell me you're not accepting this. Of course I'm accepting it. Brett, you'll die. Corvins are trained warriors from childhood. They're stronger, faster, and they've been studying combat since they could walk. You're an engineering student who occasionally goes to the gym. I've got a plan. You always say that. This time I really do. Brett was already sketching designs on his datapad, his mind racing through possibilities. I just need to build something first. Build what? Brett showed him the design. A lightweight exosuit frame, nothing fancy, just mechanical assistance using pneumatics and carbon fiber. Legal under the combat rules as long as it wasn't classified as a weapon. Nick stared at the schematic for a long moment. That's either brilliant or suicidal. Why not both? Brett said, and got to work. The fight was scheduled for 3 days from now. That gave him 72 hours to build something that might keep him alive against a trained Corvin warrior. No pressure. The combat trial took place in the station's arena 3 days later. Word had spread through the student population like wildfire. This wasn't just another fight, this was a human challenging a Corvin. A mid-tier student standing up to one of the most powerful families on the station. Hundreds of students packed the viewing galleries, climbing over each other for better views. The arena itself was ancient, built into the station's original structure. The floor was reinforced deck plating, scarred from decades of combat. The walls curved upward to the galleries, creating a bowl that amplified every sound. Brett stood in the prep area beneath the arena, working on the final adjustments to his exosuit. His hands were steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. The suit was a lightweight frame of carbon fiber and pneumatics, covering his torso and limbs. 3 days of non-stop work, surviving on caffeine and determination. Nick was helping him secure the straps, his face grim. Last chance to back out. Not happening. You're the most stubborn person I've ever met. Thanks. I think. Tala pushed through the crowd that had gathered in the prep area, her luminescent patterns pulsing rapidly, a Myrathai sign of extreme distress that Brett had learned to recognize. She looked like she'd been crying. Please don't do this, she said, her voice breaking. Yield now. Walk away before you even enter the arena. It's not worth dying over. I'm not going to die, Brett said, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed it. Brett, he's going to kill you. Tala grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Drask has won 12 of these trials. 12. He's a trained warrior. You're an engineering student who barely knows how to throw a punch. I know how to take a punch, though. Had lots of practice this week. This isn't a joke. Brett stopped fiddling with the suit and looked at her directly. I know it's not. But I'm still doing this. Why? You saved me from humiliation. That was enough. You don't need to die to prove some point. I'm not doing this just for you anymore. Brett gestured toward the tunnel leading to the arena floor. Above them, he could hear the crowd's roar, hundreds of voices creating a sound like distant thunder. Look around. Half these people are here because they are tired of the hierarchy. Tired of being pushed around. Tired of accepting that some species matter more than others. But they're not going to fight. They're just going to watch you die. Someone needs to show them that fighting back is possible. That standing up to the powerful doesn't have to end in complete defeat. Brett smiled, though he knew it probably looked more scared than confident. Maybe I lose today. Probably I lose today. But I'll stand back up. And again. And again. Until I can't anymore. By getting beaten to death. Tala's voice rose. That's your plan? By not yielding. By being annoying to the very end. Brett's smile became more genuine. It's kind of humanity's thing. We're really, really stubborn. We don't know when to quit. That's not a virtue. Sometimes it is. Kess appeared at the entrance, their feathered crest a worried yellow. They're calling for you. Arena judge wants both fighters on the floor. Brett took a deep breath. Nick finished the last strap on the exosuit. How does it feel? Nick asked. Brett moved experimentally. The suit responded smoothly, hydraulics hissing softly as they amplified his movements. Like I'm wearing a really complicated backpack. Try not to die. I'll do my best. Brett walked toward the tunnel, each step bringing him closer to the arena. The roar of the crowd grew louder. Tala walked beside him. If you survive this, she said quietly, I'm going to kill you myself for being this stupid. Deal. They reached the tunnel entrance. Beyond it, Brett could see the arena floor, the bright lights, the packed galleries. His stomach twisted with fear, but his feet kept moving forward. The moment he stepped onto the arena floor, the crowd erupted. Some cheering, some jeering, all of them excited to see what would happen. Brett scanned the galleries and spotted Nick in the human section. Beside him was a hastily made banner that read, "Humans don't quit." It was ridiculous and perfect. Drask was already on the floor, wearing traditional Corvin combat gear, light armor on his forearms and chest designed to protect without restricting movement. He looked confident. Why wouldn't he? He'd done this before. Won every time. When he saw Brett's exosuit, his expression darkened. You hide behind technology. Yep. It's kind of our thing. Brett activated the suit. Motors whirred as the hydraulics engaged, the frame coming alive around him. Humans aren't the strongest. We're not the fastest. But we're really good at using tools to even the odds. The arena judge, a neutral species that looked like a walking crystal, reviewed the equipment. After a moment, it announced, "The exosuit is classified as mechanical assistance, not a weapon. Legal under combat trial regulations." Drask's protests were waved away. The rules were the rules. "Combatants ready?" the judge asked, its voice echoing across the arena. Brett rolled his shoulders, feeling the suit respond. It didn't make him stronger than Drask, the power output wasn't high enough for that, but it multiplied his own strength enough to make this a fight instead of an execution. "Ready," he said. "Ready," Drask growled. "Then begin." Drask charged immediately, using his natural speed. Brett barely dodged, the Corvin's fist passing close enough that he felt the wind. The impact on the deck plating where Brett had been standing left a dent. Fast. Drask was so much faster than Brett had anticipated. Brett countered with a punch that the exosuit enhanced. Drask blocked it, but the force made him slide backward a few inches. His eyes widened slightly. The human was stronger than expected. They circled each other, and the real fight began. Drask fought with precision. Every movement was calculated. Every strike came from years of training. He was a weapon shaped by culture and tradition. Brett fought with desperation. He used the arena environment, jumping off walls using the suit's leg strength, kicking up dust to obscure Drask's vision, creating openings through unorthodox tactics that no trained warrior would use. But he was losing. For every solid hit Brett landed, Drask landed 3. The suit was taking damage. Brett's lip was split. His ribs screamed with pain. One eye was swelling shut, making depth perception difficult. The crowd was screaming. Some for Brett. More for Drask. All of them on their feet. Drask landed a devastating hit to Brett's midsection. Something in the suit cracked. Brett went down hard, gasping for air that wouldn't come. The deck plating was cold against his cheek. "Yield," Drask commanded, standing over him. Brett pushed himself up. Fell. His arms were shaking. Pushed up again. "Yield." Drask hit him again. Brett stayed down this time, blood dripping from his nose onto the arena floor. The smart thing was to yield. To accept defeat. To survive. But then he thought about Tala eating from the floor. About Kess and the others who'd been pushed around for years. About everyone in the galleries who needed to see that resistance was possible. And Brett started laughing. Not hysterical laughter. Something genuine. The kind of laughter that comes when you realize something fundamental about yourself. "What's funny?" Drask demanded. "You," Brett said through split lips. He struggled to his feet, swaying. "You know what I figured out? You're not really angry at Tala. Or Myrathai. You're angry because your species' power is fading." "Shut up. The Dominion isn't what it used to be. Other species are catching up. Competing. And you're terrified that one day, you'll be the ones at the bottom." Brett steadied himself, raising his fists again even though his arms felt like lead. "That's why you pick on weaker species. It makes you feel strong. Feel secure." "I said shut up." Drask charged. Brett sidestepped clumsily. Drask crashed into the wall behind him, the impact loud enough to echo. But true strength isn't about who you can dominate. Brett's voice carried through the silent arena. Every student was listening now. It's about who you're willing to stand up for. Who you protect when they can't protect themselves. He looked up at the galleries, at hundreds of watching faces. "I'm not strong enough to beat Drask in a fair fight. I'll admit that. But I'll keep getting up. Keep standing between him and anyone he tries to hurt." Brett turned back to Drask. "So yeah, you can beat me today. But tomorrow? Tomorrow I'll still be here. And I'll have friends. More every day. Eventually, there'll be enough of us that you can't push anyone around anymore." Brett raised his fists again. The exosuit was barely functional. His face was a mess. But he was standing. "Eventually," he continued, his voice softer now, "you'll realize that being feared isn't the same as being respected." The arena was completely silent. Drask stood there, fists clenched, breathing hard. He looked at Brett. At the crowd. At the faces watching with something that looked like hope. For the first time in his life, Drask realized he wasn't the hero of this story. Slowly, he lowered his fists. "I yield," he said quietly. The arena exploded. Brett spent 4 days in medical recovering. The Solaran medical technology was impressive. His broken ribs were knitting back together faster than would have been possible on Earth. But it still hurt. Everything hurt. Broken ribs, the doctors told him. Concussion. Various cuts and bruises. Mild internal bleeding that they'd stopped. A hairline fracture in his left cheekbone. You're incredibly lucky, one doctor said, reviewing his scans. Another hit like that last one and would be having a very different conversation. Noted. The doctors back home would be amazed you stayed conscious as long as you did in the arena. Stubbornness, Brett told them, managing a smile that pulled at his split lip. It's a human survival trait. We're too stubborn to know when to quit. The doctor made a note in his chart that probably said something about psychologically concerning behavior patterns. Nick visited every day, bringing homework and cafeteria food that was somehow even worse than usual. You're famous, by the way. There are videos of the fight circulating on basically every student network. Someone made a compilation of you getting back up set to really dramatic music. Great. My mom's going to see that and have a heart attack. Your mom's going to be proud. Everyone's saying you're a hero. I'm not a hero. I just really hate bullies and made some questionable life choices. But Nick's words stayed with Brett. When he finally left medical and returned to his dorm, he found messages waiting. Hundreds of them. Students thanking him. Asking him questions. Telling him their own stories of dealing with the hierarchy. When he returned to classes, the station felt different. Or maybe he was just seeing it differently now through his remaining good eye. The cafeteria vendors served everyone equally. Brett noticed it immediately. He watched a Myrathai student approach a vendor, the same one who denied Tala service, and order food. The vendor processed it without hesitation, without excuses. Not because they'd suddenly become kind, Brett knew. But because students from multiple species had started filing complaints using the exact method Brett had shown them. Citing specific regulations. Documenting every denial. Creating paper trails that couldn't be ignored. The administration couldn't dismiss dozens of coordinated complaints without looking incompetent. So they'd sent out a memo. New enforcement of existing non-discrimination policies. Vendors who refused service faced license suspension. Small change. But change. Myrathai students no longer sat alone in corners, trying to be invisible. Mixed species groups had formed naturally throughout the cafeteria. Brett watched a table where 2 Myrathai, 3 humans, a Talvir, and a Harvin all sat together, laughing at something on someone's data pad. Not everywhere. Not with everyone. There were still segregated tables, still students who clung to the old hierarchy. But enough had changed that it felt different. Tala found him after his first class back. She'd been waiting outside the engineering lab, her luminescent patterns calm and steady instead of pulsing with stress. You changed things, she said without preamble. I got beat up and nearly died. Not sure that counts as changing things. You showed people it was possible to fight back. That the hierarchy isn't as solid as we all thought. She smiled, the first fully genuine smile he'd seen from her. 3 more Myrathai enrolled this semester. From different colonies. They heard what happened here. They wanted to come to a station where someone stood up for us. Brett felt something warm in his chest that had nothing to do with his healing ribs. That's good. That's really good. It's more than good. For the first time in my life, I don't feel like I need to apologize for existing. Tala's voice got quieter. You did that. We did that. You, me, Kes, Nick, everyone who filed complaints and sat at mixed tables and refused to accept how things were. Kes appeared from around the corner, their feathered crested cheerful green. Speaking of which, Student Council is forming a committee to review discrimination policies across the station. They asked me to chair it. Their crest shifted to orange with excitement. And they asked if you'd be on it. Me? I've been here less than a month. Exactly. You don't have years of accepting the way things are holding you back. You see problems and you try to fix them. Kessa's crest shifted back to green. It's annoying. But also exactly what we need. Brett joined the committee. So did Tala. They met twice a week, working on policy changes that would outlast their time at the station. Better enforcement of non-discrimination rules. Support systems for students from marginalized species. Cultural exchange programs so species could actually understand each other instead of just coexisting. It wasn't fast. It wasn't perfect. Changing centuries of ingrained prejudice took more than one human with questionable survival instincts and an engineering degree. But things were better. 6 months later, Brett sat in the cafeteria watching new students arrive for the spring semester. A young Myrathai girl entered, looking nervous, clutching her data pad like a shield. She glanced around the cafeteria like she was expecting someone to yell at her for being there. She approached a food vendor hesitantly. Held out her credit chip. The vendor processed her order without comment and handed over the food. The girl stared at the tray like she couldn't believe it was real. Like she'd expected rejection and couldn't process acceptance. Brett remembered that feeling. The surprise when kindness appeared where cruelty was expected. "Hey," he called out, waving her over. "Room at our table." "Always." She looked at the table. Humans, Myrathai, Talvir, even a Corvin student named Vex who decided he'd rather be part of building something new than defending something broken. They all smiled at her. Slowly, she walked over and sat down. Introductions went around. Names, species, what they were studying. Someone made a joke about the cafeteria food. Someone else complained about their roommates snoring. Normal student stuff. Just people being people. Tala caught Brett's eye across the table and mouthed "thank you." He shrugged. What else was he supposed to have done? Watched someone eat from the floor and said nothing? That wasn't who he was. That wasn't who humans were. That evening, Nick found Brett in their dorm room, working on designs for an improved version of the exosuit. Not for fighting, for helping students with mobility issues navigate the station. "You know you're kind of a legend now, right?" Nick said, flopping onto his bed. "First-year human who challenged the entire social order. They're telling stories about you to new students. Stories are always exaggerated. This one's pretty accurate. You did challenge a Corvin to a fight you couldn't win just to prove a point. The point needed proving." Brett saved his work and spun his chair around. "You know what the weird thing is? I didn't do anything special. I just saw something wrong and decided not to ignore it. That should be normal. That should be what everyone does. But they don't. That's why it mattered. I guess. You changed this place, Brett. Not completely. Not perfectly. But enough that people like Tala don't have to eat from the floor anymore. Enough that species at the bottom have hope things can get better." Nick was quiet for a moment. "That's something." Brett thought about that. About Tala's smile. About the new Myrathai student who'd gotten food without being harassed. About policy changes and committee meetings and the slow, frustrating work of making things better one small step at a time. "Yeah," he said finally. "I guess it is something." The station still had problems. The hierarchy still existed in many forms. There were still students who treated others as less than, still vendors who found subtle ways to discriminate, still power structures that protected the powerful. But there were also more people willing to stand up and say this is wrong. More people willing to file complaints and sit at mixed tables and refuse to accept cruelty as normal. More people willing to hold someone's beer and do something stupidly brave. And sometimes, that was enough. Sometimes, better was all you needed to start with. The galaxy was vast and old and full of species with ancient prejudices. But it also had humans, stubborn, annoying, persistent humans who didn't know when to quit. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what it needed.